Hi there, I'm Gordiero from Careica Health. We're going to be the new oxygen supplier for the Jubilee Care Facility. And I wanted to go over some of the equipment today, just so you have an idea of what kind of equipment you're going to be seeing. A lot of this equipment you're going to be seeing today, some of it you're familiar with, and some of it is going to be brand new to you. So we're going to break it down into a few sections here. The first thing I want to talk about is the oxygen concentrator. This one is actually going to be in each residence room. Okay, now it's blue. It's a little bit, it's not as the same concentrator you're used to, but it produces oxygen the exact same way. So when they have this in the room, this is what the resident is going to go on for their oxygen needs. If you come in a little bit closer, I can show you the front of this. So on the front here, there is a panel that has 3 lights. Okay, they're not lit up yet. Okay, but what it has is when the concentrator is running, this will be a solid green. Okay, if the concentrator is running and you get a yellow light, it could be one of 2 things. It could either be the tubing. That's a problem. The tubing might be kinked. Maybe the resident has it kinked under their bed or something. Or there could be a problem with how much oxygen that the concentrator is making. Okay, and the last light will be a red light. Okay, it's not lit up right now. What happens there is if it's a red light, it could be one of 2 things. Something that needs to be done internal, that you need to let the nursing staff know, to give us a call, to let us know that a concentrator needs to be replaced, or there's no power. I've got it plugged into the wall. We want to make sure that the concentrators are plugged directly into the wall, not into a power bar. I understand in the Jubilee they've invested in some power bars that are probably a little bit better than your standard power bar that you see in the store. But ultimately, we want to make sure that the concentrator is safe. So at all times, if you can plug it into the wall, it actually takes the power better. On the front here, we were talking about where the lights would be. So when I put this on, I'm going to push down on this side where it's the 1. You're going to see everything light up, and then you're going to hear an alarm. Okay, lights up like a Christmas tree. Okay, now this means that the concentrator is on, and now it's running. You can see a green light. The other 2 lights are out. Okay, now our therapist, in this case it happens to be Victoria, who's walking around your facility and seeing your residents. She's going to be assessing all of your residents on the oxygen. She will determine how much oxygen they need. Okay, and this is where she's going to be adjusting this tube that has the numbers on it. This is the oxygen flow. So right now I'm going to set it for 2. When we set it to 2, that's where the bottom of that little black ball is on top of the number that you want. Okay? So that's set. All right. Now, what do we do with the oxygen tubing that's in the resident's nose? Well, they're going to have a long tubing with a nose piece. Okay? We're going to talk about that in a minute. But it's going to hook up to this little spot right here, and this is where the oxygen's coming out. Okay? And when you see me put my finger over here, you'll notice the ball drops. The reason why it's doing that is because I'm blocking over the flow. Okay? So, tubing goes onto here. It goes into the resident's nose. This is how you turn it on, and this is where the flow is set. One really important thing to always remember is that if you don't touch this dial, or nobody touches it once it's set, as soon as you turn the machine on, it should go back up to where it was previously set. All right, so on the back of the concentrator, there's a little window here, right? And there's this black filter. What this is for is to trap all of the dirt particles that are in the air. It's no different than the filters you have in your facility. All right? This needs to be washed periodically, typically every 1 to 2 weeks. And I already know that you have a program here whereby these filters are being looked at. Just want to make sure that you understand that when this is wet, you're not to put it back onto a machine that's turned on until it dries out. The machine can run properly with that filter removed until this is dry. The other thing that's important to note is that when it's in the resident's room, you don't want anything blocking over this. If the resident feels that the machine is too loud for them, and these are very quiet, you don't want to block over anything over the machine that will restrict the flow of air into the machine. That's very important. And if you were here right now, you put your hand over here, you could feel air being drawn into the machine. So it's very important not to block this over. It can be blocked by something covering it. It can be blocked by the wall. So make sure none of that. Otherwise, if you block it off the machine will stop working. All right? I'm going to turn this around. All right, well, we're back. So what I'm showing you here is I'm trying to demonstrate what it would be like if the machine was having a problem with no flow coming out of the tubing. I don't have tubing on here, but I've got my finger over the end, which demonstrates it. If you look closely to here, that ball was at 2, and now it's at 0. It's right at the bottom, okay? There's two things you can check on a machine that's doing this action right now before you call the nurse to come in and take a look at the equipment. Number one, make sure there's no kink in the tubing. Make sure the resident is not sitting on it or is bending it or whatever, because that can cause a problem. If you're unsure if it's the tubing, first thing you want to do, and I'm going to get you to zoom in on this here, the first thing you're going to do is pull the tubing off the concentrator, and if that ball pops up, you know it's the tubing. Can't be anything else, okay? If you put the tubing back on without fixing it, it goes right back down to 0, okay? That's number one. The second thing that can happen is someone can come in and they turn the flow off. We don't want to do that. Like I said before, we want to make sure we keep the flow on and leave it, okay? So if maybe the resident was fiddling with it and they turned it down, well, that can also cause a problem. But you'll notice what just happened. I turned the flow back up because that was the problem, but the flow is not restricted anymore, so now there's no more alarm, okay? Last thing for alarms you want to see is what happens if there's no power, okay? It can be no different if I unplugged it. There's no lights, but that means there's no power. It's not doing anything, okay? The best thing to do in that particular case is shut the unit off, put your resident on the backup oxygen or the portable oxygen in this case, and then try to determine what's happening with the equipment. Always leave your resident with oxygen on while you're trying to solve a problem. Just want you to know that you're going to have these signs in each resident's room, and there's going to be 2 different types of signs. We'll talk about this one first. This one talks about in-room at-night concentrator, this one. So what's going to be here is they're going to put the number of the liters of oxygen per minute that this is set at for your reference. If that changes, it would probably be because of the fact that the client or the resident was reassessed for their oxygen need. So if it's 2, that's another good check for you. Make sure that's at 2. If they've changed it the next day to 3, there's a reason for that. So make sure that's at 3. You want to use this as reference. On the top here, and we're going to talk about going out of the room, there's 2 different types of systems we're going to use for that. One that is refillable and one that is going to be battery operated. And the respiratory therapist who is working with your residents is going to determine which one is going to be the best one for them. And we're going to pause and we're going to... All right, we're back. So this device is called a POC, or portable oxygen concentrator. What it's designed to do is make oxygen, and it makes the oxygen the same way that this does, except it's smaller. So then we can use this in a walker or a wheelchair. It has to be tested by the respiratory therapist on the resident to make sure that the oxygen it's making is the right amount of oxygen for the resident, okay? The difference between these two is this oxygen in the stationary concentrator comes out steady. There's no involvement. The resident just has to put the nasal cannula on and just breathe. This one, the reason why it's used for going out of the room is it requires the resident to be actively using the oxygen. What I mean by that is when they have the nose piece onto this, they're taking a sniff in, okay? Now that's a bit dramatic there, but it's really, they have to take a breath in through their nose in order to make this work, okay? I'm only gonna pull my mask down for a second to demonstrate. If they're not breathing through their nose and they breathe through their mouth, this will not work, okay? So that's why we're very careful about how we test for this machine. All right, let me look at the front here. So on the top is where all of the controls are. This is where we're gonna put the oxygen tubing onto. It looks similar to this one over here, okay? So the tubing goes on there. It's just the nose piece. You don't need to have a long line. It's got a screen. It's not lit up yet because it's not turned on. And then you got some dials and buttons here. All you need to do is, if you know what setting this is supposed to be on and it's already set, All you're responsible to do is when they're going from their room out to meals or recreation or whatever they're going to be doing outside their room, and they have one of these devices, you take them off their concentrator, you put them onto this device. To turn it on, we hold the button down, okay? And I'm going to put this down on the table, and you're going to bring that camera down so you can see a top view. So, all right. Now this has been used for demonstration purposes over the last couple of days, but here's some things on here. Number one, there's the battery. You can see it's at 69%. What we want to do is get into the habit of when they go back to the room, they go back onto their stationary concentrator, you turn this off, and what we're doing is plugging it back in. Okay? This is the plug that will be in the room, okay, for that. On the charger here, you can see there's a little light. That just indicates that there's power coming to here. And you can also see now it's charging up the device. All right? This is the setting of 3. Okay, so in this particular case, we use the setting of 3. Maybe we didn't, maybe the therapist thought 4 was better. So she would push this button plus to get to 4. Okay? Or maybe 1 was the proper level for that. The thing to understand is this oxygen is delivered only by breathing in by the resident. It has nothing to do with this machine. So the idea behind this is pulse. That's the term that we use for it. And this is continuous. Okay? So, now, you're probably wondering, what kind of a container is this going to go into? Well, I'm glad you asked that question. Or I'm glad I asked that question. I'm going to put this in here. Okay? All right. So this is the bag for it. The reason why we have a bag is because we want to be able to protect this machine. All right? And if you flip it open, you can see where all the controls are. Once again, nothing has changed. You can even charge it through here. There's a little window, plug it in, and it charges. Now, the thing to keep in mind is you will see it used in various ways, but mostly what's going to happen is our therapist will either have this in a walker basket, or it's going to have this and it's going to be strapped over the back of the wheelchair. Okay, that's for stability. We just don't want this thing swinging any which way. All right, so you'll see it put properly in place. Now, that's how that device actually works and what is actually plugged in order to charge it up. Now, this is really important. If your resident is using this and this warning comes up, it's a nose with a line through it. It means that they're not breathing on the device. Okay? That's not to mean that the device won't work for them. It just means that at this particular point, what's happening, I don't know if you can still see that.
Yeah.
What's happening is maybe they're out in the activity room, the common room, and they fell asleep, right? Maybe maybe they're having a meal and they fall asleep. I think the common thread here is if they're not breathing through their nose, it's probably because they've fallen asleep. Okay? So you can encourage them to breathe through their nose, or it can be a decision that's made with the nursing staff. Maybe we need to put a stationary concentrator for certain activities while the resident, we know they're going to actually fall asleep. Okay? But other than that, the device would not be put in for the resident if we didn't feel that they couldn't make it work. So they just have to be, sometimes they have to be reminded. Okay? Now, there is a battery in here. That's really important. So I'm going to shut this off, because anytime we're going to remove this out of its protective case to get at the battery, we have to take it out of the case. It's going to be the safest way. So there's a couple features on here I'd like to show you. Number one, there's a screen here. Okay, it's a filter. This comes out. It can be washed. It's made out of metal. It's not delicate, but delicate enough that if you push too hard on it, it would break. These should be cleaned just as periodically as the filter that's on the back of the other machine. Okay, they can be put on they can be put on a table to dry out, but make sure that nothing with water on it goes on here, because this is where it draws the air into the machine. So make sure it's nice and dry. Okay, there's one on the other side. We also have the battery. Okay, so this device weighs about 7 pounds. It's not very heavy. But if you're unsure, because this is one of the first times you're managing this, just put it on the table. Rest it on the table so it's not going to fall down. There's a little button here. You push it and the machine comes apart. Okay? Now, most of your residents on this are not going to be having this removed out on a regular basis. The facility is going to have 2 spare batteries, and the nursing staff are going to decide how they want to use them. There might be, like in some other facilities, some users of the device that they use a lot of battery. So it might be advantageous to plug it in and have additional batteries for that resident for that purpose. But generally speaking, you're not taking the battery out. Everything is charged in the unit itself, and other than the fact that you might have 2 extra batteries for your facility. All right? So just to go over the procedure again, you're coming back in from a meal, you're wheeling in your resident. You're going to put them back on their concentrator. You're going to take them off of this. You're going to shut this off, make sure it's plugged in, make sure that it's charging, and then they continue on. We're going to break, and I'm going to go over the next device. The last thing we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about what other options are used for portable oxygen use. We've already talked about the POC, and I showed you about the battery and the charging, and generally speaking, this is what it's going to look like when it's actually in the resident use. It's either going to go on a walker, or with the strap on it, it's going to go in the back of the wheelchair to make it nice and safe. We don't want that flying around. Now this is something you're familiar with. The only thing that it is different is the device that's going to be filling the tank. You're used to a stationary concentrator with a piece on top, and then we put the cylinder on top. In this particular case, we're using the stationary concentrator as its own thing, and then we're going to be using this as the filling station. So it's a separate piece of equipment. But the tank looks the same. The only thing you should know is that the tanks for here are specially designed for this. You can't use the old tanks with this system. Okay? So, now, we brought 2 different types of regulators. This is technically called an oxygen conserving device, and the reason why is because on here, you can either go continuous flow, up to 6 liters, or up to 5 pulse, okay? You have these in your facilities right now, so you're very familiar with it. Some of the facilities are going to use these exclusively, 1 on each tank, because you get 2 tanks per filling station, or they may choose to use this one. When our respiratory therapists are going to be setting up the residents with oxygen, if they feel that a continuous flow regulator is better at whatever the setting is, 2, 3, 1, because they don't want any errors in somebody accidentally switching the dial to a pulse setting, because let's be honest, 1, unless you're paying close attention, 1 here and 1 here look identical. One's in green, one's in white. So you want to make sure that if it's supposed to be on continuous setting, it stays there. If it's supposed to be on pulse, it stays there. So that's a conversation we'll have with all the nursing staff, is that if they feel it's better to have it continuous, then we will. Okay? So now, each tank is going to have its own regulator or OCD on it. I'm just going to put this on for now. Okay? If you as a team need more teaching on how to remove regulators and put them back on, we'll certainly provide that for you. But what we wanted to do is have this as identical to what you're currently using. A tank, the device is already on there. The tank and the device is already on there. This little wrench here, this is a demonstrator, so don't worry about it. We're actually going to remove all the wrenches for you, because it actually has a built-in wrench. Okay? So I'm going to get you to zoom in a little bit. When you look at this device, you want it, and it's facing you, think of this like a clock. So when we want to turn the tank on, we're going to go counterclockwise. Usually just a full turn. You don't have to open it all the way up, okay? And you can actually hear the oxygen coming out, and you actually can see on here that the arrow is mostly in the green. I've been using this tank today, so it might be a little bit lower. When you shut the tank off, after you keep the flow on, so now you're going clockwise, that arrow is going to go down to the red. It doesn't mean the tank is empty. It just means that you're draining all the oxygen out of the regulator, okay? So counterclockwise to open, clockwise to close, okay? This is where the tubing will go on to. And this is where you have your oxygen settings, okay? All right, I'm just going to leave that at 2 for now. If I want to put this onto this device, which is the filling system, there's a couple things we need to ensure. Number one, we want to make sure this is not open because we don't want the oxygen to come in and out. So always make sure this is closed off. Second thing you want to make sure is that is in the red. Okay? And the reason why it's in the red is because you've left the setting at the setting that the resident needs, which is 2, 3, or 4. Okay? Then what we're going to do is we're going to look at here. So right here in this fitting, it's made out of brass. It's a very soft metal. The reason why it's soft is because you don't want to jam it on there. And this is also brass. Okay? So it's a very soft fitting. So the idea is to be gentle with this. Okay? You also want to be supportive of the bottle. These weigh about 7 pounds, and if you drop them, you could damage the regulator. You could also injure yourself. So you want to make sure that you're supporting this, no problem. Okay? With one hand, you place this in the cradle. The second hand, you just guide this into the hole and gently snap down. Okay? I'm going to do that again. Okay? Guide it into here, and you guide it into here. Okay? Now, this little area here is this little collar is what locks it in place. Okay? Now, on the front, there's some controls, right? The reason why this light is on is because it's plugged in into the wall, and this is called standby. So it's not doing anything right now. Okay? To turn the unit on, we would push this button. It's going to take a few seconds to figure out how much oxygen pressure is in the bottle, and then if it needs to fill it or not. Maybe the cylinder is completely full, right? In this particular case, it needs to be filled up a bit. So now it's running. I don't know if you can hear this, but I'm sure you can. But now, what's happening here is this little light shows that the bottle is filling full of oxygen. When the cylinder is full, that light will go away, and then you'll get this light which says, with a check mark, that this bottle is full. If you want to remove the cylinder while it's still filling, you have to do one thing. You have to shut it off so it stops filling. And then to remove this, you put your hand on the shoulder, okay, just to make for safety. You don't want it popping up. And then release with your fingers down here, just push down, and that comes up, okay? Now, I'll get you to bring the camera in a little closer. You can hear a hissing sound. And what that is, it's oxygen is being depressurizing in the system. It's supposed to do that, okay? That's the way this system works. The system you're familiar with in your facilities right now doesn't do that. So just know, don't be alarmed. That's what it's supposed to do, okay? So say, for instance, you stop the unit. You want to put another cylinder on. Same thing. Put it in the cradle. Put it in here. Gently push down. Then you can turn it back on, okay? One of the maintenance items on this as well, which is important, just like the stationary concentrators, there's filters. There's one on the other side. You'll continue to use your filter cleaning program that you have in your facilities. You want to always make sure, just like any device that we have, if these are wet, do not place them back on the unit until they're nice and dry. This unit can run for a period of time until those are perfectly dry. This unit also, just so you know, if there's no power in your facility, unless you have a backup generator and this is plugged into it, this will not run without power. The only device that we have out of all 3 devices here is the portable oxygen concentrator, which runs on battery. But even that will run out if you don't plug it in. So a good rule of thumb when you're using the cylinders is when you go back into the resident's room, you brought them back in from a meal, get them on their concentrator, start filling a cylinder. If they have a POC, get them on their concentrator, shut the POC off, plug it in, and get it charged up for the next time. And that concludes our talk about the respiratory equipment. If your facilities require additional training and additional teaching with your staff, we are quite prepared to do that. We're actually looking forward to being able to come back and do more in servicing for your staff. Thank you.